Chthonic is the fourth full-length album from funeral death doom metal band Mesmur, and this band sort of appeared out of nowhere back in about 2014 or so, when a gentleman from North Carolina started this band at some point before then, along with other people from different locations. I think the vocalist is from Australia, and other members are from around the world, and some of those I think have swapped in here and there, but generally speaking, this is an international funeral doom metal project, which has always incorporated death doom metal into their sound. There's varying parity between those elements, where naturally funeral doom and melodic death doom of the gothic variety cross over in interesting ways. The best examples of this are probably like Mournful Congregation, Lycus, and Evoken, and these seem to be influences for Mesmer in some ways. Now, uh, the approach of the band has varied over time, dependent on what sort of location, portion of reality, what have you, they'd like to depict in each piece. This wasn't quite as clear on the debut, but it was a very effective record that found the right balance between death doom metal specifically, as a riff-based activity, an atmospheric but still heavy uh, feeling, while also bearing a lot of the classic traits of funeral doom beyond the most classic form, which was a bit brittle, a bit gothic, and that still applies to the way they approach atmosphere. But this is very much kind of a modern step beyond the most classic years of funeral doom metal. So we'll get into one of the new tracks here, just to give a feeling of, what this band is all about. I think you'll get it pretty quickly if you're a fan of this kind of thing. So one of my favorite records of all time is Quietus by Evoken, and as well as the record that came after it in 2005 or so. Now, that's kind of that was my in, because I felt like this band, or the way that they approached death doom mixed with funeral doom, kind of blended those things in a strong way, and they incorporated a more unique guitar tone, which sort of recedes on this album for the fuller recording, and their focus on melodicism began to interject itself a little bit more often, and the bass guitarist tried out a few different tones album to album, and my whole thing was I ignored S. It's sort of their spacefaring album, which was reflected in the quality of Terrene, which I reviewed back in 2019 and liked quite a bit. So the gist of it is that this is a style that I'm a big fan of, but where does a band like this reach greatness without comparison? I think it's a tough thing in funeral death doom, and this album takes a strong step towards more. Also, the references, which you'll also get in a band like Worm, to be honest, but now they bring in kind of a broader variety of ideas that feed into just a bit more melody, thicker atmosphere, a more seamless death doom metal feeling, to the point where they've even incorporated a couple of, like I mentioned, Refraction has a bit of a lead guitar hook that it just spikes once, and it's just enough of a gesture to recall kind of the best of October Tide of a certain era. And those little touches have such reverberation, and this is an important realization, is that the band is working with such sonic luster and such strong production values that they've made made for a stronger album. Basically, their songwriting has improved to the point where it matches up quite well with the production values, and basically the way that they're able to invoke the underworld, the descent into it. You could tell I'd really gotten into that feeling as I reviewed the record in quite some detail. So a lot of the success of this album is going to hinge on its longer pieces. There aren't a ton of songs on here per natural funeral death doom style, and uh, I would hope that people still have patience for this style and that they still take the time to appreciate it rather than buzz through it, because this album is uh, kind of beautiful in its resonance and aggressive in its death metal feeling, but it is all about the atmosphere and the scene that it depicts. And the riffs are there, and the guitar interest is certainly there too in general, but that isn't what this album is all about. So what is it all about then? Well, the synthesizer definitely comes into play on this album more than it has in the past, and in a more creative way. And I think it's a really uh, a bolder step than we'd seen them take on the last three albums, which were iteration with good sense and pretty good taste as far as incorporating maybe some progressive elements here and some different death metal and melodic influences there, while paying careful attention to sound design. But this record, it seems to take a few more chances and goes a little bit bigger with them, to the point where it feels like they've really pushed this album out in a strong way. So I found it very convincing. I thought the atmosphere, of course, is vital to the success of this type of music, and that's really where this album excelled enough to pull me in for many more listens. So that is a high recommendation from me, and definitely one of the better records of April. Even though there's a ton of great records out, but this is the one that gave me pause. And even though I was already a huge fan of the band based on past records, this surprised me. It was something a bit different, but still bore the characteristics I would want as a longtime fan. So check it out yourself and see what you think of it. I think it's premiered by now, and read the review a little bit closer if you want some more details from my perspective.